There's a young conservative. She says that talk radio created Donald Trump, and it's all talk radio's fault. I want to share that in a moment. She's writing in something called Salon.com. Get to that here after making a. Got to tell you a quick story. I have a lot of friends who listen to the program, not only on the local level, but people I've known over the years who listen online all over the country. If you're having difficulty, though, hearing what we're talking about, you've really got to get in touch with the good folks. Mount Harrison Audiology, where Dr. Christine Pickup is doing a lot of research as well as bringing relief to a lot of people who are having difficulty hearing. She mentions that, you enjoy the holidays coming up. You enjoy time, Thanksgiving and Christmas with your family members, but if you can't hear them, it becomes very difficult and you're isolated. If you're looking for a solution, call Mount Harrison Audiology today and be ready to enjoy all the fun of family gatherings and special moments with loved ones. You can schedule that checkup by calling 312-0957. Life is worth hearing, and that number once more, 312-0957. Coming up on 9:35, it's 40. Gosh, I do love this time of year, especially going to football games. Tomorrow feels like an early Christmas for me. Uh, I've dreamed about seeing that blue field. Well, I've seen it. I've just never seen football played on it. I've dreamed about seeing that for years. Got this I wanted to mention. Her name is Carrie Sheffield, and she says she's a young conservative, and she's blaming talk radio and what she calls the conservative media. When they say that, they mean talk radio, for the rise of Donald Trump. And she says Trump is the problem, and that if we had all just listened to our betters in the conservative movement and ignored talk radio, why, gosh, we wouldn't have this problem today, and we'd have a Republican who could beat Hillary Clinton. Do I believe that some of the other Republicans could have defeated her? Yes. But I don't know that they would have also generated the excitement that Donald Trump has, at least among some people out there who feel the system doesn't work for them any longer. Here's my point. Talk radio didn't create the cities that have collapsed in this country. Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore. I used to live in Syracuse, New York, and I read the other day that per capita, it's now the worst place to live as cities go in America. These places all collapsed because they collapsed under the rule mainly of Democrats. Well, exclusively of Democrats, you'll say, in some cases. Number two, talk radio didn't pick up all the factories that were operating. We lost 55,000 factories in this country since the turn of the century. Since 2001, we've lost 55,000. That's not factory jobs, that's factories. Now, not all of them were huge, which is why the number is so big. Some of them were smaller, but small factories used to turn into big factories. Talk radio didn't force them to leave the country and leave you jobless. Talk radio didn't shut down the coal industry and leave entire states jobless. I read today and I mentioned in my pregame warm-up on Facebook today, there's a story at the Washington Examiner. One of the reporters went to Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and visited Fayette County. I used to go there when I was a kid with my dad. My dad, of course, is a guy who grew up in western Pennsylvania, native of that area. And I used to go there when I was a kid, but 40 years ago, you had coal industry and you had the steel industry. These are all gone, and they have seen a 2-point increase alone in the last year in the jobless rate. It's nearly 10% there, and they wonder why people are upset. Talk radio didn't create that. Talk radio didn't sign all of those trade deals. I'm for free trade, but it's got to be fair trade as well. Talk radio didn't sign all of those deals that help empty this country out. All of the conservative elitists who are sitting inside the Washington Beltway bubble, making a lot of money writing their position papers, but doing little else, and they got those jobs. You got all of these young snot-nosed conservative writers in Washington playing talking TV heads, or talking heads on TV, if you will. And they all went to the right schools, but they grew up in a privileged neighborhood out in the Washington suburbs. And then through family connections, they got these jobs that pay them well, and they're living the life of Riley. And then they're turning around saying everybody else is the problem. And if you'd only just follow what they're doing, and that is support all of these trade deals and the loss of your jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And, if you'd grow up in a good family that had a lot of connections, why, you wouldn't have these problems today. And I read through this, and she says, well, Rush Limbaugh tells bad jokes about women, and She praises Bill Maher, the so-called comedian from HBO. Bill Maher called Sarah Palin, I can't use the word on radio, but he referred to her as a piece of human anatomy, female anatomy. And yet she's saying that Limbaugh is mean to women, and she says because of that, women won't support Limbaugh, and they won't support his friend Donald Trump. And she says if you survey young people in this country, they have no respect for the talking heads on talk radio. Voices on talk radio, you don't actually see us much. She said, but they respect Stephen Colbert. And yeah, so what? Those guys are lightweights, and they're pushing lightweightism. They're helping dumb down the country. The people out there who actually have some gray matter are listening to talk radio. And even a lot of liberals, they won't admit it. It's one of those secret little passions they have. Even if they don't like it, they're listening every day because it's the most intelligent thing in media. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Someone needs to give this girl a good talking to. 41, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Got a lot more coming up. About 20 minutes left in the show. Well, okay, what are we going to talk about? That's called the tease. I wanted to talk about fat people in church, but we'll probably stick with the topic we're on. I mentioned this story. I never got to it this week. It was a church in Oregon, Protestant church, where they were banning fat people from the praise team because they said they were clogging the aisles. I've seen some of these TV pastors who could push themselves away from the table more often, but they were going to ban the fat people from the praise team. Some of them may have had good voices too. And then the story got picked up by Christian Post, and that sort of amplified it. Christian Post has a worldwide reach. And all of a sudden, somebody at the church thought, this reflects negatively upon us. Being prejudiced against fat people is not something we like to be known for. So now praise team can now welcome again the fatties back to the... I never got a chance to mention that earlier this week. I thought I had to laugh because I take up a lot of space at church. I'm looking for a church that not only is perhaps not quite as liberal, but I'm looking for one as well that has comfortable seating. But as I've mentioned earlier, I am trying to reduce myself. My goal is to become half the man I used to be. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. In fact, if you're looking to get in better health, it isn't always about being medicated. You don't need necessarily always. There's some great pharmaceuticals out there, but sometimes you wonder if you're just being pumped full of them in order to make a profit for the people who develop them. Dr. Eric F. Jones is using a holistic systemic approach to wellness, and he's been in practice now since 1993. He has a master's degree and a doctoral degree in marriage and family therapy. Dr. Jones uses methods of alternative healing, naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual and cognitive self-regulation, and napathy. These help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. He's currently accepting new patients, and he has evening and Saturday appointments available. His telephone number, 731-7178, and you can find him on Facebook. Eric F. Jones, Ph.D., mental health and wellness therapist, and that's Eric with a C. Rush Limbaugh is being accused of telling too many jokes about women. And apparently some women say they don't like it, as if they never tell jokes themselves. Why are there so many humorless people in media and politics? I don't understand that. And then I mentioned that the same writer in Salon, she praises Bill Maher, who once referred to Sarah Palin as a piece of a female anatomy. And, and he used to do that all the time on the air until the liberals said, you shouldn't be doing that. And then being a good card-holding liberal, fellow traveler, he decided he should calm it down, even though he tried to defend himself, saying, I'm a comedian. I tell stories and jokes. And sometimes, you make comments like that. Very true. But, if that's the case, then let those of us on the right side of the political equation get away with it too. So I've got one of my own here. A Daily Caller has this story. When Chief Justice John Roberts promised the Senate Judiciary Committee he would serve as the U.S. Supreme Court's umpire, calling balls and strikes, he most certainly did not anticipate Justice Sonia Sotomayor swinging for the fences from the end of the bench. The Supreme Court justices, who used to be very quiet about their own opinions, are becoming much, much more public about them. It used to be once in a while in retirement they might actually spout off, but even then they generally stayed in retirement quietly, but not any longer. It's so politicized. The court's always been political, as Grant Loeb said yesterday, but it's so politicized now. Everybody out there thinks they've got to go around the country telling people exactly what they think. Sotomayor gave the Robert A. Stein lecture at the University of Minnesota Law School Monday night, where she let slip the inner monologue that runs during an oral argument. And this is a quote about Antonin Scalia, the late justice who may have been murdered while visiting Texas. She said, "There are things he'd say on the bench where if I had a baseball bat, I might have used it." And that's where my joke comes in. Yeah, well, who took the one to her? Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 9:48. Thank you for joining us this morning. Telephone number to reach our program, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. Debate tonight. Fox News, Chris Wallace. First time anybody from Fox exclusively is going to be the guy who is the debate moderator. And there is a belief out there that he may, for the first time in, I don't know, decades. Jim Allaire wasn't too bad. Jim Allaire worked for PBS, and he never came across to me as being biased. A little dry, but, there was a time when people who were giving the news to you were supposed to be dry so that other aspects of what they did didn't get in the way. Brett Hume answers these tweets he gets on the end of his show every night. And people are always whining about his tie or the lapels on his jacket. And it's like, good grief, folks. He may be a little dry, but are you watching the news, or are you looking at his tie or going to complain about his hair or his voice or his droopy eyes? You're part of the problem out there, folks. You absolutely are. But we've seen so many of these. We saw that Candy Crowley, speaking of somebody getting hit with a baseball bat, when she campaigned for Obama during the middle of the debate and cut Mitt Romney off. And he should have just said, "Hey, look, lady, I'm talking." Ronald Reagan would have said that. Donald Trump will say that. But you know what? Mr. Politeness. Mitt Romney reminds me of the guy in Mad Magazine who threw the silver hanky. And, when somebody would have a problem with their grammar or wouldn't be polite. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, speaking of Sarah Palin, I'm a big fan of hers. She speaks truth to power. She always spoke the truth. She's a female version of Donald Trump.
I'd say so.
I love her.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of friends out there who are huge fans of Sarah Palin. Some people on the conservative side say, "Oh, she doesn't do enough reading and she's not well informed." Franklin Roosevelt, who's the great hero of liberals in this country because he started us down this socialist path, on the other hand, when it came to actually being a leader during a war, was a tremendous wartime leader. He was actually giving up on the New Deal at that point himself. Franklin Roosevelt was at best a C student. He wasn't bogged down by details, wasn't terribly intellectual, but he was a great leader. And I think that's what the people who complain about Sarah Palin tend to miss, is that leaders get out in front and lead. They don't necessarily sit around and get... Jimmy Carter, on the other hand, was constantly bogged down in the minutia. And maybe the worst president next to, I don't know, Pierce or Buchanan America ever had. You're up next. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a little question as far as the rigging of the voting and stuff. As far as Hillary and her minions have gone as far as stealing delegates during the primary, what are the chances that she might be bold enough or daring enough to try that with the Electoral College?
Well, back in 2000, Bob Beckel, working for Al Gore at the time, freely admits he used the word "I'm lobbying." Said he was lobbying the Electoral College as he was trying to get them to switch their votes over to his candidate. So not impossible, obviously. And the electors. Thank you for the call. The electors are not bound by your vote. I mean, they're supposed to follow that as, I guess, guidance, but they could decide if they got together. This is where this is where the issue comes in. Um, Now, Evan McMullin, if he takes Utah and maybe takes Idaho as well, he gives it to Hillary Clinton. But if you have someone like him who would actually deny her the needed votes she needs to get over the top, then all of a sudden the door is open. For instance, if Bernie Sanders was suddenly a write-in candidate in his home state of Vermont and he denied Hillary Clinton the electoral votes there in a close race, then all of a sudden it goes to the House of Representatives. Now, the House has any number of different candidates. Being that it's a Republican House right now that it can choose, could go along with someone like Paul Ryan. There's any one of these people. If Evan McMullin throws a monkey wrench into this, and he will take votes from Trump, but let's say hypothetically he took them from Hillary Clinton, and then all of a sudden there was a no decision, and it had to go to the House, and then the electoral college could follow that. So the popular vote could be rendered meaningless. This is all hypothetical. It's not going to happen, but it's hypothetical. The electoral college could just suddenly get together and decide on somebody it liked. They could say, well, we'll go with Mitt Romney, or we'll go with some Hollywood actor. Anything like that could crop up. I mean, these are not beyond the realm of possibility, but they're pretty close. 9:54. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. Things to watch for in tonight's debate. There is a writer at the Washington Examiner who says the goal now of the two candidates is to depress the turnout, the popular vote turnout. This is often the case. Politicians will give lip service, and it's your responsibility to vote, and Americans should exercise that responsibility. But frankly, some parties, it actually favors them to have low turnouts. So if they can figure out ways to discourage people from coming out and casting votes, it can help them get elected. And the writer at Washington Examiner that I was looking at the piece this morning online, and the writer said something to the effect, you've got two unpopular candidates. That is, they're unpopular among large bodies of the American public. Doesn't mean they're unpopular among their core supporters, but it still means that they're seriously flawed candidates. People wish now they could have had some other choices. They did, by the way, during what we call the primary season, but this is what we ended up with. So it's the job of Trump to try and depress Hillary Clinton's vote and vice versa. And this can be done by reminding people at 538 blog, which tracks all of the polling data and does all of the scientific research into all of this, says Trump is gaining some steam by using this phrase. It's a rigged election, and he's using it a lot, over and over and over again. If there is some bombshell, for instance, that would come out about Hillary Clinton in the next 2 weeks, and I think that if you're going to be dropping these October surprises, there was the guy up in Maine who dropped the one about George W. Bush having a drunk driving arrest in 1997, but he did it so late it didn't matter. And a lot of people realize, well, yeah, 1977 was a long time ago, and everyone knew George W. Bush had become a teetotaler and didn't have those issues any longer, so it didn't matter. You can't do it unless you can show that Hillary Clinton actually murdered Vince Foster the Sunday before Election Day. That might depress the vote. But you've got to find some other, and that's not going to happen. But let's just say, because somebody out there right now, some liberal blogger is saying, you know what he's inferring. I'm making a point. But if somebody out there in the next 2 weeks can find something really dastardly Hillary Clinton was doing behind the scenes that would tick off liberals to the point they wouldn't show up and vote for her, that would be what would finally turn this back into Donald Trump's favor. Is this going to happen? I am so fearful now that media is so much in bed with the woman, just like her husband is in bed with whatever maid is walking through the house, that liberals are so in bed with this woman that they will do whatever they can to the fellow travelers in media now from here on out to suppress any evidence that would hurt their girls' chances. At the same time, they'll double down in their efforts and triple down in their efforts to dig dirt on Donald Trump, because They can't stand the idea that he could win. And again, these folks in liberal media believe that they are the smartest people in the country and they have to save the rest of us from ourselves. Speaking of drunkards, as I brought it up before, I've worked with a lot of these people. In my television days, there was a bar down the hill. We had 3 TV stations on one street. The fourth one in town was located a couple of miles to the east. But after the 11 o'clock news, there was a place called McGregor's at the bottom of the hill from 3 of the TV stations, all located on this hill. And at the bottom of that hill at 11:40, 11:45, the doors would swing open and all the local TV folks would come in and start drinking pitchers of beer and dumping down shots. And these are the people who are paid to tell you the news. And they try to tell you what you need to think. 9:58, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And the guy who's the main anchor at ABC News, his desk used to sit right next to mine back in those days. He was there too, pounding him down as well. And I think I brought up this story before. He had an affair with a coworker who was 17 years older than he was. She had 4 kids. He broke up her marriage. And then when he got hired for a job in Boston, he left her behind. And he's there passing judgment on Donald Trump. Never forget, folks, we are dealing with evil. And evil should not be rewarded. Well, we've got Rush Limbaugh coming up next. God willing, and the creek don't rise. I'll be back here Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock right here on KLIX.